The night was silent, except for the soft crackle of burning wood. The small alien village was almost gone. Houses burned to black shapes, and smoke curled up into the starless sky. Ethan Cross, a human soldier far from his home, moved slowly. Between the broken walls, his boots crunching on ash, he carried his rifle low, his eyes scanning every shadow. The war had brought him to this planet, but tonight he was alone, cut off from his unit after a battle went wrong. The smell of smoke mixed with something sharper. He had seen many battlefields, but this one felt different. It felt like something was watching him from the darkness. The moon gave little light, and the fires were dying, leaving the village in half dark. Somewhere in the distance, voices spoke in an alien tongue, sharp and cold. Ethan knew the enemy was still here, hunting for survivors. He passed a collapsed home when he heard it, a sound so soft he almost thought he imagined it, a weak cry, broken, almost like the sound of a wounded animal. He froze, listening. There it was again, slightly louder. It was coming from the ruins of a small hut on the edge of the street. Ethan moved toward it, every step slow, careful. His rifle ready, inside the ruins. A beam of wood had fallen, trapping someone underneath. In the faint light, he saw her. An alien woman, young, her skin a pale silver blue, her hair tangled and dusty. Her clothes were torn, and a deep wound on her side bled dark against her skin. She looked up when she heard him, her wide eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She didn't speak, but her lips moved, forming words in a language he couldn't understand. Ethan knew she was begging. For a moment, he hesitated. She was the enemy's kind. Helping her could get him killed. But then he saw the way her hands shook, the way her breath came in short, painful gasps. She would not last much longer. Ethan dropped his rifle on the ground beside him and crouched near the beam. The wood was heavy, but he pushed with all his strength, his teeth clenched. It shifted, groaning, and finally rolled away. She cried out in pain as the pressure left her leg. Ethan slipped his arms under her and lifted her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, but her body trembled against him. Her head rested weakly on his shoulder. He could feel her heartbeat, quick and unsteady. The enemy voices outside grew louder. They were moving closer. If they found him here, both of them were dead. Ethan grabbed his rifle with one hand while keeping her steady in his arms. He stepped out of the hut and kept to the shadows. The village felt like a maze, each corner holding danger. Smoke made it hard to see. Somewhere ahead, an alien patrol passed, their weapons glowing faintly in the dark. Ethan pressed himself against a wall, holding his breath. The girl's breathing was loud in his ear. One wrong move, and they would be caught. The patrol walked by without seeing them. Ethan moved again, his boots soft on the ash. The girl stirred, whispering something, her voice thin and broken. He didn't understand her words, but he caught one sound: help. It was strange hearing that word in his own language from her lips. He nodded, though she might not know what it meant. They reached the far side of the village, where the burning houses gave way to the dark outline of the forest. Ethan knew the trees could hide them, but also hide danger. He stepped into the shadow of the first trees, the smell of leaves mixing with the smoke behind them. Somewhere far away, an alien horn sounded, long and sharp, the kind of sound that meant the hunt was on. The girl flinched in his arms, her fingers gripping his shirt. Ethan tightened his hold on her and moved deeper into the forest. The night closed in around them, but he didn't stop. The path ahead was unknown. The enemy was behind. And the weight in his arms was more than just a wounded stranger. It was a choice he could not take back. Ethan knew one thing for certain. If he wanted to see the morning, he had to keep moving. Ethan moved deeper into the forest. The night air cooler here, the smoke from the burning village fading behind them. The wounded alien woman rested against his chest, her breathing shallow, her head heavy on his shoulder. Every step felt slower than the last, but he kept going, his eyes always searching the darkness ahead. The forest floor was uneven, roots and stones hidden under leaves, making each step a risk. Still, he knew staying still was not an option. A sound came from behind, faint, but enough to make his muscles tense. It was the snap of a branch, followed by the soft hum of alien voices. The enemy was following, moving carefully, just like him. Ethan adjusted his grip on the girl, holding her tighter, and kept walking. He could not run. Running would be too loud and would exhaust both of them. Instead, he chose a path through the thickest parts of the forest, where the branches hung low and the shadows were deep. The girl stirred, her fingers weakly tugging. At his sleeve, she spoke in her language, but her tone was urgent. Ethan stopped and leaned closer so she could speak again. This time, he caught a word he recognized: danger. Her eyes looked past him, into the darkness behind. She didn't need to explain further. They were being hunted. Ethan kept moving, but his senses were sharp now, listening for every sound. A night bird called in the distance, its cry broken halfway. Not natural, it was a signal. The enemy was using the forest sounds to talk. Ethan had seen this tactic before on other planets. It meant the hunters were spreading out, closing in from different sides. He picked up his pace, his boots silent on the damp ground. The girl clung to him, each step jarring her wound, and he could feel her flinch. Her blood was still warm against his side, soaking through his shirt. He didn't have time to stop and treat her injury. First, they had to get far enough away to be safe. The forest began to change, the trees thinning slightly through the gaps. He could see moonlight on the ground, pale and cold. He found a small clearing and stopped for a moment to catch his breath. The girl's eyes fluttered open, and she looked around, fear in every movement. Ethan crouched and set her down gently against a tree. She tried to speak, but her voice was too weak. Instead, she reached for her side, where the wound was. Ethan pulled a small medical kit from his belt. He tore a strip of cloth from his own undershirt and pressed it against the wound. The girl gasped, her teeth clenching. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Though he knew she might not understand, she nodded slightly, her eyes locked on his face as if trying to read him. When the bleeding slowed, he tied the cloth in place and lifted her again. The time they had stopped had been too long. He could feel it. The forest was too quiet now. Low growl rolled through the air. Not human, not even alien speech. This was an animal sound. Ethan turned his head and saw glowing eyes between the trees too. No, 3 shapes moving slowly, their bodies low to the ground. The enemy had sent trackers, beasts trained to follow the scent of blood. The girl's blood would make it easy for them. Ethan's jaw tightened, and he began moving again, faster. Now, the beasts followed, their growls growing louder. Somewhere behind them, the alien voices called out. They were driving the prey, him and the girl, into a trap. Ethan's mind raced. He needed a way to break their trail. The forest floor ahead sloped down into darkness. If he could reach lower ground, maybe a stream or wet soil could hide. Their scent, he spotted a narrow path to the left. Half hidden by bushes, pushing through, he felt branches scratch at his arms. The girl whimpered softly, and he whispered to her, "Hold on." The path led down into a shallow ravine where a thin stream flowed over rocks. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. He stepped into the water. The cold biting at his boots, he walked along the stream, letting the current wash away there. Tracks. After several minutes, he found a fallen tree and crouched behind it. The girl's breathing was heavier now, her face pale, even in the moonlight. He brushed damp hair from her forehead. For a moment, their eyes met, and she gave him a faint, tired smile. It was strange. They were strangers' enemies even, but in this moment, it felt like they were bound together by something stronger than war. A distant howl broke the moment. Ethan knew they couldn't stop yet. He lifted her again and stepped out of the water. The forest ahead was darker, the air colder. Each step took them deeper into the unknown. The hunt was still on. But Ethan had already made his choice. He would not leave her behind. Not now, not ever. The forest grew darker with every step Ethan took. The moonlight almost gone under the thick canopy of twisted branches. Leaves brushed against his face, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Somewhere above, small creatures moved along. The branches, their eyes glowing faintly before vanishing into the dark. Ethan's boots sank slightly into the wet ground, each step soft but heavy. The alien girl clung to him, her arms loose but still around his neck, her breath warm against his collar. The silence was deep, broken only by the distant sound of running water and the faint rustle of leaves. It was the kind of silence that made the hair on the back of his neck rise, somewhere behind. He knew the hunters and their beasts were still searching. They were not rushing, they were patient, like predators. Who knew their prey would tire sooner or later? Ethan could feel the weight of that knowledge pressing on him. A low mist began to gather around his boots, swirling between the roots of the giant trees. The trunks here were wide enough for 3 men to stand side by side, their bark covered in strange glowing moss. The light from the moss cast eerie shapes over the forest floor. Ethan kept moving, but every shadow looked like a crouching figure. The girl shifted slightly in his arms, whispering a word he didn't know. Her voice trembling. He didn't need a translation. Fear sounded the same in any language. They came to a massive root system, twisted like the claws of some buried creature. The gaps between the roots formed small caves, deep enough to hide in. Ethan crouched low, sliding into one of the hollows, his back pressed against cool bark. He listened, his breathing slow. In the distance, faint blue lights moved through the trees. Enemy scouts. Their armor shimmered softly in the darkness as they scanned the ground, their weapons ready. Ethan stayed still. The girl holding her breath against him. One scout stopped near the root they were hiding under. He aimed a scanner at the ground, the device humming softly. Ethan's hand tightened on his rifle, ready to fight if they were discovered. Seconds felt like minutes. Then, without a word, the scout turned and walked away, the blue lights fading into the mist. Ethan waited until the sounds were gone before crawling out of the hollow. He knew they couldn't stay too long in one place. The enemy would circle back. He adjusted his grip on the girl and began moving again, choosing a path that kept them in deep shadow. The trees here grew closer together, the air colder. Every step seemed to take them further from safety, yet closer to some unknown danger. The girl whispered again, her voice barely a breath. Ethan leaned down, trying to understand. She repeated a word, shadows. Her eyes darted to the forest floor, where the mist seemed to curl and move like living smoke. Ethan followed her gaze. For a moment, he thought it was just the wind. Then he saw it, a shadow sliding across the ground, moving against the direction of the moonlight. It wasn't human, and it wasn't the enemy soldiers. Something was following them. It moved silently, almost melting into the darkness whenever he tried to focus on it. The girl's grip on him tightened, her nails pressing into his shoulder. Ethan quickened his pace, weaving between trees and stepping over tangled roots. He didn't look back. Sometimes, in places like this, looking back made the danger faster. The forest opened slightly, revealing a clearing filled with glowing flowers. They swayed gently. Even though there was no wind, their light painting the air with a soft blue glow. Ethan stepped carefully, avoiding the flowers. The girl reached out weakly, brushing one with her fingers. It closed instantly, folding in on itself as if hiding. Her eyes met his, and she shook her head. Whatever these plants were, they didn't like to be touched. A branch cracked behind them. Louder than before, Ethan spun halfway, catching a glimpse of movement in the trees. Not a soldier, not an animal he recognized. It was tall, its shape bending unnaturally, and its eyes reflected the faint glow of the flowers before he could move. The thing stepped back into the shadows and vanished. The girl buried her face against him, whispering fast in her own language. Her voice shook, and though he didn't know the words, he understood the meaning. It was not the enemy, but it was dangerous. Ethan knew they couldn't stop now. He moved through the clearing, keeping low. Until the glow faded behind them, the forest grew even darker, the mist thicker. The sound of the running water was closer now. Maybe a river or a stream. Water could help them hide their tracks, just like before. But the danger wasn't just behind them anymore. Now it was in the trees ahead as well. They came to a fallen log, wide enough to block the path. Ethan stepped over it, but before his boot touched the ground, the girl gasped and pointed. In the distance, through the mist, more blue lights flickered. The scouts were ahead. The shadow in the forest was behind, and somewhere the beasts were still hunting. Ethan's mind raced. He had carried her this far, but the real danger was only just beginning. He tightened his hold on the girl, feeling her heart racing against his chest. The forest of shadows was closing in on them, and there was no way back. The sound of rushing water grew louder as Ethan pushed forward through the mist. The forest floor sloped downward, the air becoming cooler and damp. The alien girl in his arms was lighter than before, and that worried him. Her breathing was shallow, and her head rested limply against his shoulder. He could feel the heat of her fever even through his torn shirt. The trees opened suddenly, and before them stretched a wide river. Its surface shimmered with countless tiny lights, glowing insects drifting just above the water. They looked like falling stars caught in a slow dance. The beauty of the scene almost made Ethan stop to stare, but his instincts wouldn't let him. Beauty in the wild often hid danger. The girl stirred, her weak voice breaking the silence. Danger. Water. She whispered in broken English. Ethan looked at her. Then, back at the river, he saw no waves, no ripples. The surface was too still. That alone was strange for a moving current. Her eyes met his, and he could see fear there, not from the enemy, but from something in the water behind them. A faint howl echoed through the trees. The hunters were still coming. Ethan's choices narrowed. They could stay and be caught, or take their chances with the river. He shifted her weight, tightening his hold. "We go," he murmured, more to himself than to her. She shook her head weakly, but she didn't have the strength to argue. Ethan stepped to the edge of the water, feeling the damp mud sink under his boots. The river's glow reflected on their faces, painting them in shades of blue and gold. He tested the first step, the cold biting at his legs. The girl shivered, clutching at his shirt. The water was deeper than he expected. Reaching his waist, after only a few steps, he moved slowly, each motion careful to avoid making too much noise. The insects above swirled lazily. Drawn to their movement, one landed on his shoulder, its tiny body glowing warmly before lifting away. For a moment, it felt peaceful. Then something brushed against his leg. Ethan froze. The touch was light, almost curious, but the current shifted. Strangely around him, he glanced down, seeing only the glowing haze from the insects. The girl tensed in his arms, whispering something rapid in her language. He didn't understand, but her voice was filled with warning. He kept moving, but his pace quickened, halfway across. The water beneath them rippled violently from below. A long, dark shape slid past his legs. Faster than he could react, it didn't attack, but it circled. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He gripped the girl tighter, lifting her higher to keep her above the water. Suddenly, Another shape broke the surface a few feet away. Its skin was slick and black, with a faint shimmer like oil. It had paint, no visible eyes, only a mouth that opened silently. Revealing rows of sharp teeth, Ethan didn't wait. He forced himself forward, to his legs pushing hard against the current. The glow of the insects swirled chaotically around them, as if disturbed. By the predator's movement, the creature darted closer. Its motion quick and fluid. Ethan shifted sideways, kicking at the water with all his strength. The splash startled the thing, sending it diving under again. He took the chance to push forward, the far bank only a few meters away now. The girl's arms clung tighter around his neck, her breathing fast. Another ripple came from behind. Closer this time, Ethan didn't look back. Looking back wasted time, with a final burst of energy. He lunged toward the muddy bank. His boots hit solid ground. And he stumbled onto the shore, collapsing to his knees. The girl slid slightly in his arms, but he caught her before she could fall. They were both soaked, their clothes heavy with water. The girl's eyes were half closed, exhaustion pulling her under. Ethan set her down gently on the damp grass, glancing back at the river. The glowing insects had already returned to their slow dance. There was no sign of the creature, as if it had never been there at all. But Ethan knew better. Danger didn't always announce itself twice. He took a deep breath, forcing his tired muscles to move again. They had escaped the water, but the forest ahead was still dark, and somewhere behind them, the hunters would soon find the river crossing. That meant they had only minutes before the chase began again. The girl's hand weakly grabbed his wrist. She pointed toward the tree line on the far side. "Hide. Cave," she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze, spotting a faint break in the undergrowth. It could lead to shelter, or it could be another trap. Still, he knew standing still was the worst choice. He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. The forest swallowed them again as they left the river behind. The glow faded into darkness, replaced by the cold and the whisper of leaves. Ethan's boots squelched in the mud, every sound louder than he liked, in the distance. Another howl rose, answered by a second. The enemy was still closing in. The river had slowed them, but it hadn't stopped them. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle and kept moving. Tonight, danger was not just in the enemy's hands, it was in the land itself. The forest felt different now, heavier, as if the trees themselves were leaning closer to listen. Ethan could hear the wet squelch of his boots and the soft drag of the alien girl's breathing. Her weight in his arms was constant, but he noticed her head leaning more heavily against his shoulder. She was fading fast. He knew they needed shelter. But the sounds behind them told him they wouldn't reach safety without a fight. Somewhere in the distance, a deep howl rolled through the air. It was quickly answered by two others, higher and sharper. Ethan didn't need to guess what they were. The enemy's hunting beasts. He had heard stories about them, creatures bred for him, speed, smell, and silence. They could track blood from miles away, and the girl's wound was still bleeding under the cloth he had tied. He adjusted his grip and moved faster. The trees seemed to twist around them, the roots thicker now, forcing him to watch every step. Branches reached low, clawing at his arms and snagging his wet clothes. The air smelled different too, sharper, like the wind carried a scent of something wild and alive. The girl stirred slightly, whispering words he couldn't understand. Her tone was urgent, warning him. A rustle came from their left, soft but too deliberate to be the wind. Ethan stopped, his body going still, through the gaps in the trees. He saw a shadow glide between the trunks. It was low to the ground, but moved with deadly grace. The glow from its eyes caught in the faint moonlight for a moment before it vanished. Again, it was closer than he thought. He moved again, weaving through the trees every few steps. He glanced back. The lights of the hunters were not visible yet, but he could hear them, soft voices, steady footsteps. They were moving slowly. letting the beasts push him in the direction they wanted. A trap, he thought. They weren't rushing because they didn't have to. The sound of running water came from ahead. Faint, but promising. If they could reach it, maybe it could mask their scent again. Ethan shifted course, heading toward the sound. But the moment he stepped into a narrow stretch between two thick trees, a growl ripped through the darkness behind him. It was close, too close. He turned his head just enough to see it. A massive creature, its body low. Its fur slick against its skin, its mouth hung open in silence. Teeth glinting, it moved like a shadow, the kind that could leap before you even knew it was coming. Ethan tightened his arms around the girl and broke into a run. The forest became a blur of trunks and roots. He jumped over a fallen log, the girl gripping his shirt tightly. The growl came again, followed by the pounding of heavy paws on the ground. The beast was chasing now. Ethan's boots hit the muddy edge of a stream. Splashing water, he waded in quickly, moving along the current to confuse the trail. The girl whispered something again. Cave. Near, her voice was weak, but her eyes looked toward a rocky outcrop ahead. Ethan followed her gaze and saw a dark gap in the stone, half hidden by hanging vines. If they could get inside, it might buy them time. He moved as fast as he could, the sound of the beast closing in behind. They reached the base of the rocks. Ethan shifted the girl to one arm and used his free hand to push the vines aside. The cave was small, but deep enough to vanish into shadow. He ducked inside, moving quickly until they were far from the entrance. He set the girl down gently on the stone floor, her breathing ragged. The cool air inside the cave wrapped around them like a damp blanket. Outside, the beast slowed, its paws crunching softly on leaves. It growled low, sniffing. Ethan crouched near the entrance. His rifle aimed into the dark. The shadow moved past the gap once, then again, circling. The sound of its breathing was loud, deep. For long moments, it didn't leave. As if deciding whether to force its way inside, Ethan stayed still, his finger on the trigger. He knew firing would give away their position to the hunters. But if the beast came in, he'd have no choice. The girl reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. When he glanced back, she shook her head slowly. "Wait," she whispered. Her eyes were fixed on the cave wall behind them. Ethan followed her gaze and noticed something strange. A narrow crack in the back wall. Cold air flowed through it, carrying the faint scent of fresh earth. It might lead deeper, maybe even out of the beast's reach. He nodded, helping her to her feet again. They moved quietly toward the crack. Squeezing through sideways, the narrow passage opened into another chamber, darker but safer. The sounds of the beast outside grew fainter. Ethan exhaled slowly, his muscles aching from the tension. They had escaped, for now, but the hunters would not stop. And the forest was still full of dangers they hadn't seen yet. Ethan glanced at the girl, her face pale, but her eyes still watching him. She had trusted him enough to lead them here, and he had carried her through the first wave of danger. But the night was far from over. Somewhere out there, the enemy was still closing in, and he knew they were running out of places to hide. The cave was cold and damp, the air heavy with the smell of wet stone. Ethan's boots scraped lightly against the uneven floor as he guided the alien girl deeper inside. The narrow passage they had squeezed through opened into a wider chamber. Where the ceiling arched high above their heads, drops of water fell from the rocks, echoing softly in the silence for the first time in hours. There was no sound of pursuit, no howls, no heavy footsteps. Ethan set her down gently against a wall. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were open now, watching him closely. He could see the pain in her face, but also something else, a kind of nervousness. She glanced toward the entrance, then back at him. "Safe for now," she whispered in broken English. Ethan nodded. Though his instincts told him safety was never permanent in enemy territory. He knelt beside her, checking the cloth tied around her wound. It was soaked again, warm with fresh blood. He pulled out his small medical kit and began to replace it with a cleaner bandage. The girl winced, but stayed still. Her eyes locked on his hands. "You fight." "Not for you," she murmured softly. Ethan glanced up, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he doubted she understood every word. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to speak. Then she lifted her hand and touched the side of her neck. Her fingers traced a small silver marking on her skin, a mark that glimmered faintly even in the dark. "This? Me," she said, her voice low. Ethan realized it was not just decoration, it was a symbol. He had seen it before, painted on banners and worn by enemy leaders during battles. "You're important," he said slowly. Her eyes met his, and she gave the faintest nod. "Father?" "Leader," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan understood now. She wasn't just a villager caught in the wrong place. She was the daughter of the alien resistance leader, the man the enemy armies wanted most. If they caught her, they wouldn't just kill her, they'd use her as a weapon to break her people's will. She lowered her gaze, her voice softer. "They burn. To find me. They kill all." Her words were broken, but the meaning was clear enough. She had been hiding in that village when the enemy found it. She had been wounded during the attack and left behind when others fled, and now the enemy had sent their best hunters to track her down. Ethan leaned back slightly, the weight of the truth settling in. If he delivered her to his own people, she could be a bargaining tool. If he left her, she would die, and if he stayed with her, the enemy would keep coming until they were both dead. He rubbed a hand over his face, staring at the rough stone wall. He had already made his choice hours ago when he first picked her up. He wasn't going to leave her now. No matter the risk, the girl watched him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "You, human. Why help?" she asked slowly. Ethan met her gaze. "Because you were bleeding," he said simply. Her lips pressed together, as if she wanted to say more, but didn't have the words. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing steadying slightly. A distant noise made Ethan tense. It was faint, almost lost under the sound of dripping water. A low rumble. It wasn't the beasts, and it wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of shifting stone. He moved to the edge of the chamber, scanning the shadows somewhere beyond the walls. The cave connected to another tunnel. If the hunters knew this cave system, they could come from that direction. Ethan returned to her side. "We can't stay here long," he said. Even though she might not understand every word, she nodded faintly, as if she already knew. Her hand reached for his arm, stopping him from standing. "If I die, you tell." "Father," she said slowly, each word costing her effort. Ethan shook his head immediately. "You're not dying tonight," he said firmly. Her eyes softened, and she let her hand fall away. The noise came again, louder. This time Ethan grabbed his rifle and moved to the far side of the chamber. The tunnel there was narrow and black, the cold air flowing through it in steady breaths. He listened, hearing faint movement inside, too faint to be footsteps. When he returned to her side, she was struggling to push herself up. "No. Run," she whispered, pointing toward the tunnel. Ethan shook his head. "If we run blind, we could end up in their hands faster." He replied. She didn't argue, but her eyes told him she feared staying even more. Ethan helped her stand, supporting her weight again. Her legs shook, but she stayed upright. He guided her toward the narrow tunnel, moving slowly to keep their footsteps quiet. The darkness swallowed them quickly, the sound of dripping water fading behind. The air here was colder, carrying a faint, metallic taste. Somewhere deep ahead, a soft flicker of light appeared. It could be an exit or another danger. Ethan paused, listening. Behind them, the rumble of shifting stone grew louder. He didn't need to guess anymore. Something was coming, and they didn't have time to wait. He adjusted his grip on the girl and moved toward the light, whatever was ahead. It was better than being trapped in the dark with no escape. The tunnel ahead narrowed before opening suddenly into a long slope. The faint light Ethan had seen earlier was brighter now, shimmering from somewhere far above. The air was fresher here. Carrying the scent of trees and soil, it was the smell of the outside world. Ethan's grip on the alien girl tightened as he adjusted her weight in his arms. She was weak, her eyes half closed. But she seemed to notice the change. Her lips parted in a faint whisper, "Sky." Behind them, the rumble of shifting stone turned into a sharper sound, boots on rock. The hunters had found the cave. Ethan didn't waste another moment. He pushed forward, boots slipping slightly on the damp ground as he climbed the slope. The tunnel wall seemed to close in on them, making it harder to move quickly. The girl's head rested against his shoulder, but he could feel the faint rise and fall of her breath. She was still alive, and that was all that mattered. A sharp howl echoed from behind. The beasts were coming too, their claws scraping the stone. Ethan's legs burned with effort, but he kept going. The light grew stronger ahead, turning from a faint glow into a pale opening. Fresh air rushed in, cool and sharp against his skin. They were close, close enough that he could almost feel the open space beyond. A shadow moved across the opening for a heartbeat. Fear gripped him. The enemy could be waiting there. But he had no choice now. He shifted the girl slightly and pulled a smoke grenade from his belt. With his teeth, he yanked the pin and tossed it ahead. The small pop echoed in the tunnel, and thick white smoke began to fill the air. Ethan charged into it, the girl clinging to him weakly. The light outside hit his eyes, forcing them to adjust quickly through the smoke. He could see movement figures turning toward him. Voices shouted in alarm, but the haze gave him cover. He darted left, using a cluster of rocks as partial shelter. Beyond them lay a slope leading down into a stretch of wild grass. He ran for it, his boots pounding the earth. The grass whipped against his legs as he pushed forward. Behind him, the smoke began to clear, and shapes emerged. The hunters were already following. One raised a weapon, firing a streak of energy that scorched the ground inches from his feet. Ethan didn't slow. His mind locked on a single thought: reach the friendly lines. If he could get the girl there, the enemy would not dare attack openly. The slope ended suddenly at a shallow valley. In the distance, he saw them human soldiers, their armor catching the light, weapons ready. Relief surged through him. He raised his voice in a shout, "Hold fire! Friendly incoming!" The soldiers turned toward him, their weapons lowering slightly as they recognized the human form through the haze. The hunters behind him saw the same thing and hesitated. Crossing into human lines would mean a direct fight, one they might not win. Still, they kept moving. Their pace slower now, but dangerous. Ethan's boots hit the flat ground of the valley. The soldiers rushed forward to meet him, one of them grabbing the girl from his arms, while another took his rifle. "She's hurt bad," Ethan said quickly. Breathing hard, the medic among them dropped to one knee beside her. Checking her pulse and wound, the girl's eyes opened faintly, scanning the faces around her. When she saw Ethan, she reached out a weak hand. He crouched beside her, taking it gently. "You carried me through danger," she whispered slowly, her voice trembling, her gaze softened, and a faint smile touched her lips. "Now, I will carry your name forever." Ethan squeezed her hand before the medics lifted her onto a stretcher. She didn't let go until they had to pull her fingers free. The soldiers began moving her toward the safety of the camp. Ethan stood, his chest still rising and falling with deep breaths. The hunters had stopped at the edge of the valley, watching silently from the shadows of the slope. They knew the chase was over for now. As the medics disappeared with the girl, Ethan's commander approached. "You had half the enemy's hunting force after you," he said with a half-smile. "What were you carrying?" Ethan's gaze followed the stretcher being carried away. "Someone worth saving," he said quietly. The commander didn't ask more. Sometimes in war, the truth was better left unsaid. The sky above the valley was beginning to lighten. The long night was ending, and with it, the desperate run through enemy territory. Ethan turned toward the trees one last time. Somewhere in that forest, the hunters would be regrouping. But he knew they had failed in their mission. The girl was alive, and as long as she was, the enemy had not won. He took a deep breath, the air cool and clean in his lungs. The danger was not gone. It never was. But for this moment, they had made it. He had carried her through fire, water, shadows, and blood, and in doing so, he had carried her to freedom.